Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our first Light Bytes session of 2021, and a big welcome to Ed Rutherford, who's joining us this evening to have a little chat, um, just generally to Ed about his work. Ed spends a lot of time in cinematography, but also particularly wanting to have a look at his work on the Little Birds series, which is what I saw, which I thought was absolutely amazing, and I got a hold of Ed straight away, and we had a bit of a chat. And so, hi Ed, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. So it's a pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Brilliant. Cheers, you too. We'll get onto Little Birds in a sec. I just sort of firstly wanted to just have a little chat, find out how you sort of got started, what your routine was, and how you sort of ended up doing what you're doing now.
I was a keen photographer as a teenager and had some ideas and some passion. And then I went to university and sort of discovered filmmaking really at university, making Super 8 films, mainly for surfing. I was sort of brought up on the coast, and surfing was a big part of my life and the outdoors. And we had an AV room. I remember with not much equipment at all, but a few Super 8 cameras basically. So I got into making some films for my friends and what have you. And then there was one vacation over the holidays. I happened to meet. I can't remember exactly how the connection was established, but I met a cinematographer called Freddie Palombo who lived down in Cornwall, and he needed an assistant to help him make. It was a ridiculous number. It was like 95-second bumpers for the network channel, which was called West Country at the time, and it used to go doo 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 West Country, and there'd be like a potter on a wheel or a seagull eating chips or a beach ball blowing across the beach. It's sort of like vignettes of everyday Cornish life. So Freddie had a Super 16. I think it was an SR2, and which I'd never seen or used. And he was very passionate guy, and said, "Yeah, come along. Let me and you. We're going to zap around in my Volvo estate for the next 3 months. We're going to make a bunch of these every day. I'll teach you everything about the camera. You can, hang out, and let's see how it goes." So I finished that summer like hugely excited, inspired. I felt my sort of a window on a different world had been opened, and we'd spent many hours in the Volvo talking about the productions that Freddie had done, the projects, difference between drama, commercials, and all these things. So I hadn't really before then looked at cinematography as like a sort of a vocational career as such. I was more sort of interested in stills photography, at that time. So I then through Freddie and some other connections, met cinematographer Richard Greatrex, who is a huge mentor and figure in my life still. Richard took me on as a camera trainee on the film Blue Juice, which was a surfing film shot down in Cornwall, again just round the corner from where I lived at the time. And all my friends, everyone from the beach, got jobs on that film as either as extras or what have you, or in various departments. And I was in the camera department. So all of a sudden, I was working with a fantastic camera team on a great film with hugely inspiring people in all departments, from sound, costume, makeup, production, some producers, some really interesting characters who is again still a part of my life today. And again, it was like a window, a light shining straight through on this whole new world. We had two cameras, two movie cams, which is what Richard shot that film on. And I thought, wow, here you go. This is, next step clapper loader, as it was at the time. And so that was really it. That was the touch paper that lit the next, whatever, God, over 25 years ago now, to where we are now. So Richard understood I had a passion for storytelling and for light. I really did have always had a passion for light in regards to storytelling, and that comes from my passion for stills photography, I guess, and how important it was to try and maintain that. And so he was sort of like, and I kept asking him questions as a young kid as I was at the time, and he was like, well, look, maybe a structure through the camera department could be a path to cinematography if that's what you feel you'd be interested in. So I worked in the camera department. I spent years working as a clapper loader. Very luckily for some of the you know some of the most creative teams in the UK over those years in the 90s, and worked on all levels of productions, all types of dramas, films, commercials, music videos. So the whole lot. What I wasn't doing so much at that point was documentaries and corporate work, which I subsequently did do when I crossed over to cinematography myself. And I said, right, let's make a go of this that way. Um, so I worked in the department, clapper loader, focus puller, operator, and during that time, over that sort of 10 years, to start with, I tried to meet budding directors from commercial companies. The commercial companies that I was working with, I was hassling them to maybe shoot test commercials with scripts that young creative teams were passing over. And at the time, there was a lot of that work. And it was, you could build a show reel, if you like, in commercials relatively quickly on things like test commercials. So I did that, and then I kept plugging away at that until I got an opportunity to take a campaign, a brand campaign, which was the rebranding of BBC Two back in about 2000 or 2000, maybe it's 2004, something like that, 2003, 2004. But there was a big rebrand, and I think the advertising agency Abbott Mead Vickers, there was a copywriter and creative director an art director who gave a young budding director friend of mine a chance to pitch on these scripts. And we went out at the weekends and we basically shot the pitch for these scripts. Myself on the camera, Mark directing, my brother was the actor. And it was all these things for these, I don't know if you remember these old BBC Two idents, where it was like a number two, and there was, there'd be like waves crashing through a number two or a zip on a thing. And we did that, and then didn't hear anything. And about 6 months later, they got back in touch and offered Mark that campaign. And at that point, because I didn't really have anything to back me up, I was expecting them to say, we'll take Mark, but then Mark needs to have an experienced cinematographer with him. And, I'd kind of heard that before many times. And they gave me an opportunity. So I did a bunch of those adverts, and that got me my first agent. And that really enabled me to sort of close the door on assisting behind me and then move, autonomously into a sort of a working landscape of cinematography. Firstly in commercial, for years really, until things started to then go back round full circle into feature films, and more recently this sort of new golden era of television, which we find ourselves in. I guess it shouldn't be called television anymore, but that new landscape has been a bit of a game changer for everybody. And into Little Birds.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting that you talk about sort of light and storytelling. My background is largely theatre based, and that obviously is important for us because we light plays that way as well. And that was, I think, the thing that I found really captivating about Little Birds is exactly that. There was that light was absolutely telling the story. You knew exactly where you were. You knew exactly what people were feeling, and it was yeah, it was exciting to see. You know, it was really great.
We got a mandate to really go for it with Little Birds, which is rare. We had a mandate from the channel, from Sky, and that was backed up by the production company and really championed by the director. It was, in some regards, the writing was a bit haphazard for various reasons on Little Birds, and it was always a melodramatic. It was going to be a melodramatic sort of execution, and we sort of referenced Rainer Fassbinder and obviously Cirque, Almodovar, but it was kind of like a sort of Fassbinder type idea. So, you know, it was kind of, I was like, well, look, how far can we go with this? You know, and my references when I interviewed for that project, I sort of took contemporary modern fashion references from some of the work I do with photographers that I've worked with over the years. And they kind of chimed with the producers and the director. They were very bright, block color, high key images. And so it was kind of like, once we started rolling on it, it was like, well, you know, are you going to sort of support this idea? You know, can we sort of take that into sort of character driven drama? And because it was an emotional narrative, it meant that the lighting could be um, motivated not by the not by the plot so much, but by the senses. It was more an emotional response. So the lighting in some way was necessary to really, everything had to be big, not like just having a big score, but it was like the visuals needed to be big. And I think that sort of helped with maybe a couple of the writing issues. And it also just was such a great opportunity to then sort of maintain that language all the way through each episode. You know, that was a challenge, because although there was light, color, and contrast everywhere, it did adhere to a roadmap. It was sort of designed, and it was complicated to maintain that. You know, when you're shooting cross episodically and you're, you know, on a number of episodes through each shooting day.
So I've got a couple of pictures, some production shots that I just shamelessly stole as screenshots from the thing. So I'm just going to sort of, you know, show a couple of those. I'm just going to step through a couple of these. I mean, this was obviously one of the iconic shots for the sort of whole show and the campaign. But you know, once we really started getting into that world, for me, it was the sort of saturation of color, and I felt that was quite a brave choice, because it's not something that you see all that often. And the one thing I wanted to chat about, couple things I wanted to chat about that this sort of makes me think of, is firstly how much of a risk is it dealing with saturated color for camera, and you know what's your sort of process and sort of, you know, establishing these sort of shots. What's your sort of day on set like to sort of get, you know, to get these looks?
I think the dealing with color, dealing with strong hue now is quite different digitally to how it was on film. In that, let's say like a color, for example, peacock. Just looking at this with Jean-Marc Barr there, you know, if I was, you know, on film, peacock in my mind's eye looked a certain hue, and it might be something I would use here for this sort of deep sort of cyan. And then, so over the years, with digital cameras evolving and color spaces changing, the one thing I sort of noticed, and I've always found complicated, is that each camera seems to immediately render a hue, a strong hue, slightly differently, irrespective of skin tones, and how, obviously, if you're working in this sort of strong palette, you've got to be so careful with the skin. Your sort of go-to box of gels, if you like, might not be right. So it involves a lot of testing, really, and in the time that you have available, which is obviously limited with a camera. but through sort of, I'm always looking at different gels, if you like, and then different RGB mixes with lights and moving lights and new technologies, seeing how close they are to what I would say a swatch, and then seeing, okay, if we're here with cyan 30, is that the same as like a Roscoe, or is it, how far away is that from, say, like steel blue, steel green, mist blue if it was lighter, and so there might be like six colors around there that I'd have a look at, and we'd also look at just traditionally mixing like quarter, like half blue with maybe quarter plus green, or even like quarter blue and an eighth plus green. Look at a few variations, but it's before we get to there, I started my prep with my building of a kind of a color space in a world with LUTs. So the camera that I've been using for the last couple of years, the Sony Venice, and before then I'd always, the Alexa is like a go-to camera, and the various incarnations of the Red camera as well. And I got a little bit bored with the Alexa. I don't know why. I just got a little bit bored of it, and so I was quite excited with the Red, and I've used that a lot. But I find it really interesting, the color space on the Red, but I find it feels like there's a bit of a veneer for me. And I felt that Sony has always been had a very authentic reproduction of color. This is another chapter on why I really sort of go to Sony, which we can talk about a bit later if you like. But once we had the post-production house established, which was Technicolor on this, I worked with a colorist, Dan Coles, who I've worked with for many years, and I'd go to Dan and I'd have a couple of things that I'd make in Photoshop, sort of as an idea for a LUT for the show. One might be something that we're seeing here, and then one might be, a little bit stronger, a little bit less saturated, and then we'd maybe have like two basic LUTs, like maybe an interior and an exterior night and day, so say 4, and we'd start from that, and we'd just start fiddling basically, and Dan would take some images, some log images that that might be from just something we've had on another show, maybe, so something that I know, and we'll look at the LUT and looking at the hue. So this is a colorful job. I would have taken some colorful images to Dan, and we would have had a look at the first LUT, and then what I try and do on the job is then work in aces, so work in which is like sort of a unifying color space all the way. And I shot a film before Christmas in just after lockdown, but that was on film on Super 16, and that was in aces, and I felt it was fantastic. It's the first time I'd shot on film for ages, and going through the dailies, which was a 4K scan, and then going backwards and forwards between, the editors, the MX36 files, the daily file, and the post-production house. Aces was really good. I knew what I was looking at, and the same with the on the TV drama. It's like I want to create a LUT, and especially if it has a strong look, something which I know is going to look on the dailies the way it looks on the monitor for the director as we shoot, and also as a reference when the colorist puts the offline as a reference, when we get towards the grade, that it's kind of true all the way, and ever more so with something which is a strong feeling of color and contrast. You don't want deviations to that, because it just gets confusing. So it really begins in finding a LUT that works in a kind of not too aggressive way, and it's responding to the strength of the colors nicely, and you can sort of take it one way or the other. And then it's hopefully getting some camera time to specifically, like on this job, I specifically looked at cyan and amber, which is always, I guess, the sort of complementary space we always go to. But I was looking at those, you know, the ambers going from like sodium through to gold and mustard and all these things, and in the cyans looking from very strong, like the Storaro gels to sort of RGB mixes, and then it's really looking at how a gelled light on an HMI or on a tungsten source, how does that relate to when you're then using an LED light? And it's, you know, often, you know, with the swatches that are dialed in on, let's say, like the sky panels, and you just dial in the swatch, if you like. Is that actually like the gel that's on if the gel was on a HMI lamp or whether it was on a tungsten lamp, you know? And there's some discrepancies. So then you sort of making your own mixes of those colours. So really for such a colourful show, the prep time was really important, and it's never enough. So you inevitably end up tweaking the colour as you go, and just try. And on this job, it just the hues had to. I didn't want to be looking at the hues in the grade and going, shit, that one was way off. So we're now going to look at isolating the hues, because there's not usually that much time in the grade to get really into the nitty gritty of it. So I do try to get the sense of the color, the sense of the contrast, and the skin tone. I try and get that as much on the money as I can when we shoot. Yeah.
And the other thing that for me was apparent as well was the amount of depth that was in some of those scenes. I mean, this image is one example, but there were a lot of scenes where there was, you know, some great foreground and some lovely saturated stuff that just sort of added these incredible sort of dimensions to things. So, you know, when you're sort of setting up a shot, what's your sort of starting process? So, you know, if you've got sort of a team of guys standing by with a whole bunch of different gear, and you sort of, you know, in each instance saying, right, in this one I need one of those there and two of these here, and make that blue and pop some 201 on that, or is there, or have you had the luxury of time to sort of plan a bit of a sort of lighting schedule for each moment?
Yeah, every moment is scheduled. So every scene follows a palette. So like sort of the lilac feeling behind Juno there, you know, that's reflective of like an emotional state of her character in that story arc, if you like. Now the ambers on the practical lights was always pale amber gold. It was always 009 for those pracs. And I sort of thing I tend to do, I've noticed, I just tend to maybe, like, if the lighting's emotionally led, I tend to really like practicals to feel the same almost across the whole film. Doesn't matter where I am, you know, which character's house, you know, whether it's, you know, whether it's a house or a restaurant or whatever it is. I always feel there's a little bit of quirky psychological subversion if you sort of go make a statement by going, we're unifying this practical theme. So we basically, as far as starting this, you know, this set was pre-lit while we were on another set. This was so on this stage where this is a set, and we had three on that particular stage. I think we had three sets, so we would have been working somewhere else, and that would have been pre-lit. It would have been roughed in, but then at that point I would have jumped in, and we would have, so the colourful light in the background with the Helios tubes, the Helios tubes, or the Titans, sorry, the larger ones, and everything on this show was back to a desk. So, and by this time I'd married up the mixes. It was always the hard bit, was mixing the color of the Titans with the gels.
Right.
So I think our our cyan vibe was at one part, I think it was cyan 15, but then it went to Steraro, which was like a richer hue in the cyan. The cyan kind of changed, and I think we ended up with steel blue at one point. So it's kind of, it was marrying up. If I wanted to feel reflections of that window light, that moonlight, I'd put reflections on the set with, with the LED units, whether they could be like, there's obviously the practicals kicking off the ceiling there, but we'd always try, maybe feel some cyan under the chin, or somewhere either as a backlight or something of interest in depth, and that would be from an LED fixture, sort of imitating and wrapping that window light really. So as far as designing the scene, uh, each scene had a color. So each scene of the story, the color represented a certain character at a certain point. So I knew going into, once we're scheduled, and I knew the rules for each character and where we were in the story. They weren't overcomplicated. It was literally, if it was an interior, I'd have certain pracs, and there was a certain, geometry to the shots we were doing, and to setting the scene in that space. But then the color would be an accent of color, and a kind of, we had a particular key light for our characters, for Lucy here, and for Sharifa, which was Yumna. So they had different key lights, and we changed the key light slightly, but we carried the key light from scene to scene. So again, it wasn't motivated in the natural world. I always start feeling light. Where's the light come from? It comes from the sun through a window. That window light we all love might come from a certain direction and wrap around, but it wasn't, the lighting wasn't, this wasn't sunlight here. It was really like perlite, almost like a sort of a projection of a dream.
How so then you come from a sort of interior scene like that, where you sort of come to something outdoors, which obviously is I assume daylight is kind of a sort of key factor here. How much filling in for daylight did you find you were having to do to keep your language and your narrative going?
A lot. And that was actually one of the questions when Stacey interviewed me for the job. She was like, Ed, if we go strong with the lighting and we make this like an emotional landscape, she goes, we'll break the spell if we go outside. If the minute we're outside, this world doesn't continue, then that's it. We've lost. And it's such a hard one, isn't it? Under a certain timing and schedule, to actually go, right, well, we need, obviously, to do that, then we need to take lighting units everywhere we go, big ones, but also mobile ones, and not overcomplicate things, because we're shooting 7 scenes, 8 pages a day, sometimes 6 to 8 pages. So you're the planning, as much as you can plan for position of shooting at a certain time in the day to get the light you want, goes so far. But we were filling in everywhere, So I think, my package was essentially 2 24K tungstens outside, 1 6K HMI, and 2 360 sky panels. That would be that was kind of, and we would maybe leapfrog some of those some of those units, but essentially I'd always have like a 24K would be the key light, sometimes with a quarter blue, or sometimes with a half blue, but often just Bosch, full flood. And then I'd fill in with the sky panel, which I found really good actually. And if I needed a bit more, we'd try and get the 6K HMI in close, maybe with F2 for just a bit stronger, maybe a bit more directional fill. But the one unit I used all across the job. I used it, and this was down in Tarifa, and the sun was up. It was high most of the day, and it was bright. It was just so much reflected light there. The sea, it was amazing. But I found that the old theatre cans, the old par cans, I use it often with a couple with spot bulbs, a couple with medium bulbs, but the spot bulbs obviously burn through the gel straight away. But we were using like a magenta, like a Follies pink outside. We're sometimes using a green, but we'd use a bit of straw, a bit of magenta, and sometimes I think a bit of steel blue. But I would take 2 or 4 par cans. If we didn't have much space, just 2 par cans, and it was amazing. You could be like, even at this distance here where the lens is, I could get a kick with some color, maybe on a character, maybe on some clothing. If we had cars, that was easy because you can reflect into the chrome from so far away, with a bit of, those, it was amazing. These, like, really, just the old theatre cans, they were the one light which really just gave me an accent of color. So outside with our scene building, we literally used the larger lights, but we used those for the feeling of high key light, frontal, like a fashion key light, a little bit of a backlight, and then I would get accents of color with the par cans, and I was amazed at how much color we actually got with that.
I mean, I'm sure that the sort of camera technology, having moved on like it has, is probably helpful. It would have probably been a lot harder to do that sort of thing 10, 15 years ago, I suspect.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the way the cameras respond to color now, the digital cameras, here in a low key environment, 10 years ago, that would have been hard to get such a clean image. What I love about the Venice, we're shooting 16-bit, 444, whatever it is, like, raw Sony equivalent for codec. But in the grade, it was the signal was so clean. The base ISO of 500.
Right.
So this would have been 500, but every now and again, really low key scenes, put the base ISO up to 2000, and the image was still held up. I mean, if you really pushed into it, you could see some sort of chromatic sort of aberration and stuff. But this would have been like 500 base, probably would have had a stop of probably 2.8, just under 2.8, and and this scene was lit with small Helios tubes, and a day with the eye light. I used small mirrors on set, so I sort of try and bounce in, and I bounce in off like anything. It can be like a dado, a small 150-watt dado, or it could be a 650-watt tungsten with some gel, and I just kick a little bit of light into the eye off the axis. So that's where you can just see it on his cheek there on the left and around his lips. But it's a blend. I just use here in this instance, the color is kind of a wash, the hue, and then just try and get a little bit of bite in there as well.
And again, you're picking up, again, looking at the sort of depth and stuff that you sort of created here. And it's now that you've started talking, I'm starting to pick up the sort of trends and the sort of character colors and things that are that are sort of quite prevalent.
Yeah, there's reds. I've just forgotten about red. Red came into it. It's funny because he didn't want to overcomplicate the palette, so because your mind would just melt after a certain point. Just less alone watching it, but the worst thing would be going, God, I don't know where I am. Is today a red day or is it a cyan day? Oh, it's every day. It's everything every day. So it really tried to keep things quite simple. And a couple of things did creep in, like red crept in, but it wasn't a red as a threatening red. I think it was, to be honest, I can't remember why red crept in this scene, but there would have been a reason that I've written down somewhere.
I mean, I would think that having a director who sort of supports this vision is hugely important. Taking on a sort of approach like this, you've got to have absolute buy-in from your creative team.
Well, she I remember we did one of the first scenes we did in the brothel on. It would have been on the second shoot day or the third shoot day. The first couple of days were outside. The third day we went interior, and it was it was a really strong light. I remember Stacey going to me. She's like, Rutherford. She goes. There's no going back now. She goes, are you sure about this? She goes, I don't think we can grade it out. I said, well, yeah. Unless you go black and white, it might be interesting. But that would be, you know. But it was. She gave me the belief and the confidence, and I did look to Stacey in that first week. I was, you're looking to see when they're looking at the shots on the monitor, when she, thinking, shit, is she enjoying this? Is she liking this? And then I was, when our producers come back around, I'm like going, God, I hope the response isn't going to be, shit, what's that massive yellow light coming through the window? And but rather, how exciting. There's this really, really sort of slightly perverse color palette. And I would just bring everyone, everyone was, a cineast and, had an awareness of sort of colorful melodrama. And we wanted to sort of, push it into sort of a contemporary, it's a period drama, but but push these sort of contemporary themes really.
Yeah, and I mean, again, here, you're picking up on the sort of colors and stuff. And the one thing that I also noticed a lot is you seem to rely quite a lot on practicals to put texture into the background. I'm looking at some of the lamps here and things, and they were sort of casting some lovely shadows, and that was also something that sort of tracked through.
Yeah, we worked a lot with the production designer in prep, looking at things like these lampshades. Obviously, it's set in Tangiers, so you've got these very wonderful Moorish influences of that sort of lattice work on windows, almost like a sort of a confessional or something. But they're very Moorish sort of latticing. So shadows were and shadows are, so important to me. We played with moving shadows, and we played with lots of interesting sort of covers for lamps, in the backs of sets. And I think that's, I've always looked to point sources in depth. That's like a big go-to for me. Especially in period where you can do it easily. If it's candles, you can really do so much with just a couple of candles in the back of the set. Before, if you're working on drama and where there's no, maybe there's oil lamps, but if it really is candles, there's nothing there. There's no fill as such, but you can get this lovely sort of sort of Rembrandt type lighting and fall off, and it's great. It's wonderful and rich. So I think take that into the world of practical lighting, and always try and have as many options as possible and more, and really then take it away. I like going on to a set and then taking away the practicals, finding there's too many there, which is great because then you can just pull them back. But I think the practical design was very much a part of the palette.
Brilliant. So one of the reasons why I wanted to chat to you is as ETC as a company, we've also started to we've obviously been largely in the entertainment world and the architectural world, and we've recently released a couple of fixtures that are specifically aimed at the film and television market. And there's a range of panel lights and Fresnels and things like that. So I'm also using this session a little bit as an opportunity just to talk about those. So I've got a little short little promotional video which I'm just going to play quickly. So while I'm sort of getting that ready, how do you feel that the sort of move of LED has impacted on what you do? Because I mean, I know you said there was a lot of tungsten and HMI and stuff on this shoot. Do you think that that'll always be around for you, or do you think there'll be an eventual shift to a more predominantly LED rig?
It'd be interesting to see where LED technology gets the power of a large Fresnel, the directional, the sort of the weight and texture of a directional Fresnel. I don't know if that's there yet specifically. As far as fill units go, absolutely. And there's so many interesting units now, and I think now that the whole CRI index, the quality of the light is generally seems to be on point with skin tones much more than it was. I'm always I always sort of start with tungsten light really. For I just tend to see that, to me, feels like sunlight. I sort of start my sort of thinking, my processes with that, and then how far I want to take that back to neutral. Because I always work with a mixture of color temperatures on the lighting. I love working in mixed color temperature environments, and then working out with a digital camera where I'm going to set the camera to get the feeling of the levels, and then how my skin tone might sit inside. I've always got one swing. There's always a swing in my lighting, and it kind of starts. But what I've noticed is that I was always really resistant in using LED light for let's say a beauty light or a key light on a face, on a character, and I kind of have evolved. At first through kind of speed, LEDs free up so much more time on set, especially if it's a battery operated fixture. It's so much quicker, lighter, the heat, the fact that you can keep the heat down on the set, and it's so versatile in terms of sort of the scope of luminosity, and then often you can sort of narrow, maybe not focus with a lens in the same way, but you can narrow things down, cut them down. But I found that what I'm doing with LED fixtures, if I'm using them with key lights, I'll use them with soft boxes. I'll use them with textiles, like things I'll get from like haberdasheries, like old silks and old Indian silks, and have some color in them, some blue, some green, some amber. And then I also love using magic cloth, which I think goes really well with LED fixtures. I think for me, a kind of like a sky panel type unit with like a soft box and maybe half grid, and in front of that some magic cloth. That to me starts to feel like a book light, an old wedge book light, which I would have maybe had a tungsten or an HMI unit into. That was always my favorite key light, was always like a bounced wedge light through like f3 or 400 Lelux or something like that. But it takes so much time to build a wedge. It takes up so much space on the set. So you're sort of trying to find this feeling of like a wrapping window light key, which has some nice fall off, but still has a good sense of identification in the face. And I think LED fixtures are starting to provide that quality of light.
Good. Well, we've got our new Phosphor Panel, which launched. Actually, launched just before we went into the first lockdown. So that's been around for a while. So if anyone who hasn't seen Phosphor, I'm going to play a little promotional video.
There is so much that can happen in post-production. Maybe it doesn't have to. If you could just have a more beautiful picture right from the beginning.
ETC is not new to the studio and film market. We've been making products for that industry for over 4 decades, whether it's lights or consoles, networking, dimming. But what we wanted to do with the Phosphor line was make products that were designed specifically with that industry in mind. We knew that we could make a fixture that would not have to sacrifice brightness for quality or the other way around. And so we've developed a series of panel lights that are truly tools for professionals.
We started with the question, what is the best light for camera? ARG stands for the Advanced Research Group. ARG was formed in 2016. It was Fred's idea. He specifically wanted a group that was focused on research. He has always been passionate about the quality of light.
We try to identify problems that people are having, and then we go back into our offices and we think, how can we solve this problem?
We can pick solutions that are not necessarily economical just to see if it can be done. And at some point, maybe in the future, if it becomes economical, then we can implement it.
With the industry move to LED technology, one of the things that has been sacrificed up until now has been these long wavelength reds. The red that we have today looks red because all color is relative, and it was next to things that were more orange, shorter wavelengths. But we've still actually been missing all of these beautiful long wavelengths that we had with tungsten until now. And now we have this deep red. So the red we've been using and that the industry uses, the sort of standard red, is around 635 nanometers. This new red is around 660 nanometers. And 25 doesn't maybe seem like very many, but it's huge.
ARG had prototyped a set of fixtures using the deep red because we thought that it might be useful. And Fred and Wendy and a video camera got together and they noticed that if you illuminate a subject with deep red, the appearance on the video display was so dramatic that Fred said, we have to have this in our next fixtures.
The great thing about the phosphor panels is that they don't make you choose between brightness and quality. We spent a long time developing these products because we wanted to have a fixture that would give you both. So what we've ended up with here is an incredibly bright fixture that also has just the highest quality of light output that you can get. All this comes together in our X8 color engine. The luster array brings new depth to color mixing capabilities with a greater color gamut. Not only rich and saturated when you need that, but also just clean and crisp when that's what you're looking for.
So in this product, we have a luster and a daylight array. The luster array, it's focused on saturated colors and warm white applications. And we have the daylight HDR option, which is focused on tunable white light and specifically neutral white to cool white.
My favorite thing about the new panel lights is the user interface. We have a brand new user interface that was designed specifically for this product line that includes backlit encoders that are color changing, so they correspond to whatever you're manipulating on the screen itself.
I'm excited by some of the features that make this fixture easy to use. Things like the color picker, things like the tuning parameter that let the user select the output from brightest, best spectral, or a hybrid combination of the two.
This being so interacted, constantly re-aimed by hand, pulled out of a truck, we needed to make sure that this was a tactile product.
John and I were using 3D printing and different types of rapid prototyping to address problems that we saw, but also just show other engineers, people in marketing, what they're headed towards.
In exploring those handles, we were actually able to solve a lot of other problems at the same time, such as addressing fixture stability. We looked at including an extrusion rail in the back that we can mount any type of accessory to.
The utility in the grip rail is the fact that it kind of pairs well with all the different little devices and all the little gadgets we have now. There's things like additional batteries or putting tablets on, even just the ability to loop up a cord or a cable and actually put on the back of your fixture really comes in handy.
We also have a lot of unique things as a company to offer to the studio and television industry. All of our fixtures are covered by a 5-year fixture warranty and a 10-year warranty on the LED array itself. We also have industry-leading support. We have technicians available 24/7, 365. We started this process by asking what's next and how can we help advance the artistry of lighting for camera. We've carried this question with us throughout the development process. The Phosphor family is the culmination of that work, as it delivers a panel light that is uncompromising in brightness and color quality.
Hopefully everyone got the sense of what that fixture is all about. It's part of our new X8 color array. So there are now 8 colors in our LED mixing array, and of course the idea behind that is to really get the full spectrum of color. You touched on it earlier, Ed, that recalling color swatches is never always quite what you think it's going to be when you're dealing with LED, and this 8-color array from the tests that we've done seems to be working really, really well. So I'm really looking forward to you getting your hands on some and having a play. If anyone who's in the session would like to see them or would like to have a look at that video again without all the audio glitches, we have put the link to that video in the chat. So it is absolutely there. And of course, you're always welcome to contact us and arrange some demos and things like that. So Ed, getting back to you, I just wanted to sort of chat a little bit. You touched on sort of color spaces and sort of how cameras are responding and things like that. And how different do you find your world is moving from film, which was there for so long? I mean, it was a stalwart for, decades, and quite quickly, I think there's been a huge shift to the digital world. So how do you find that how was that shift for you?
I think, living through that shift, as far as it was really the camera technology that was hard. You felt like you were beta testing a new camera, pretty much on a client's money, which made you feel like you were exposed. It wasn't, there were a few years around sort of whenever, I don't know, 2005, 2008, when it felt like things, were changing. It was kind of big seismic shifts in, going through sort of CCD chips, whatever it was, like a 4/3 size or third, and things with a certain sensitivity to light and color, which was quite basic. And then cameras being marketed that they were like sensitive to light to a certain point, but it was more marketing. They weren't really that sensitive. And everything was changing really, really fast. And so as far as getting to grips with these cameras was such a thing that what you took for granted, which was the light and things like gels and your approach, you were suddenly aware that things look different, but you weren't sure why. Couldn't really understand why they looked different. And each camera had a different approach to sort of color space and a different rendering of color and of skin tone and sensitivity. That it was tricky. Now it seems like we're way on the other side of it. I think you could pretty much pick like any camera out of a box. Even, like something like Sony Venice, but you could take out like a small camera like the FX6 that's out now, which is like a 10-bit 422 camera. It's got the Venice sensor and it's like a $5,000 camera. It's amazing with an E mount. That's an incredible tool in the way that cameras now seem to, you can be at 16-bit, but you could also be at 10-bit and making fantastic projects, films, just at that resolution using similar codecs, and it would be pretty much look the same as it would on the more on the beefier Venice, the 16-bit Venice, or the same with the Alexa, same with the Red. It seems to be now you can, and the Panasonic, I mean, all manner of Blackmagic. There's so many cameras now that you can literally pick up and you're in safe hands. I mean, I think that was the thing with the film camera. You knew it's like a sewing machine. You did what it was supposed to do, and it would do the same thing on the North Pole or in a sand dune in Dubai, and it would just do what it did, and film was film. So you had things to worry about with that, but you knew what you were in for. And I think the sort of the learning experience and the evolution of digital cameras feels not that it's behind us. It feels like now it's in a really exciting place where things now are getting smaller, more energy efficient, delivering incredible images at resolutions that we wouldn't have thought possible like 10 years ago. So it's really exciting. And I think now we're not looking at things saying, we want, we're not searching for a filmic image. We're not doing that thing which happened when there was this crossover. It was like, this camera looks like film. That statement would seem bizarre now, because film still very much exists and has a place. And and it's not a budget question. It's an aesthetic, a sense of creative expression as to when film might suit a certain project, or a certain director might want to tell his story that way, and might have some support to go that way. But the digital camera, the digital camera pool, if you like, is broad and has that feeling of security, that you're not going to be stitched up, that you're not sort of, that things going to be reliable. You're going to be able to sort of come with a plan and execute it. So yeah, it's a really exciting time, and the same with lighting. LED lighting going the way it's going. There's been that. I remember so many units. As you're going through the sort of development round about the same time, that might be really exciting, but were sort of flawed in some sort of regard, and it's just part of the development process. And now we're in a very exciting time where there seems to be a feeling of sort of people are responding to the needs of sort of creatives with sort of practical solutions in these fixtures and in these cameras.
And I mean, how much work do you find, or how do I phrase this? Do you find that you try and set your shots and set your lighting to minimize the amount of work that needs to happen in post? Do you find that with the advent of LED and where camera technology is now, that you need to spend less time in post, or are you finding that you need to spend more time to sort of grade and balance?
I think there's. I'm not saying there's never enough time, because it's an expensive process. But I really try, and what I'm enjoying now is that with like live grading on set and using a LUT and CDLs, you can set a tone. I love in a grade the feeling that your colorist is like an artist as well as bringing something to the project. It's not like, also the edit informs the final, the beyond the conform. The edit informs so much can change with the story from what you imagined when you shot it with the script, that the light needs to change. Some scenes you shoot for like on the blink are suddenly like night scenes. You find 3 months later when you see it off, like, shit, never thought that was a night scene. And it goes the other way as well. You get other scenes which are night are suddenly day, and they go, oh, it's okay. We'll just do some sky replacement here. You just go, what are you talking about? This is a nightmare. But but that sort of happens. But that aside, the ability to sort of define the tone of the visual language as you shoot is, I really like to do that, and I feel that now the technology is there, that when you're doing that on set, it's saving time when you get to the grade. Because I get back into a suite and there's whatever it is, 10 hours a day for so many days. If you spend 2 days finding the look, that's 2 days you've kind of lost. So I think for me, live grading on set and CDLs are really great, because a colorist gets some idea ahead of the game, and they also get a true offline, which they can see where you're getting at creatively. Now, you've already had those chats with a colorist. You've already talked about references. They understand the story, hopefully, and I always communicate along the shoot and say, well, I've had to maybe squeeze the LUT this way or something. I'm now feeling that things are a bit more saturated. It's a bit deeper. There's less fill. The blacks are stronger. But I really find that the more you can do as regarding the feeling of the image as you shoot, it just enables. There's so much to do in the grade, whether it's like the technical stuff these days with some kind of cleanup. There might be a lot. I like to spend time on skin tone in the grade. I think that's where I like to spend my time, actually. Not retouching, but like on skin tone, and that takes a lot of time, because you're tracking shots the whole time with skin tone, and so it's labor intensive. And I find that if you've got good skin tone across a project, and all of a sudden there's one act, or there's like an episode where it goes off the mark, it really exposes the product. So I find it the most labor intensive part of the grading process. And so if we've set the feeling, then that doesn't really take too much work. So the more we can do as we shoot, it frees up time to really get a premium finish to the product in the grade.
Okay, and on yours, I suppose there's no such thing as an average shoot really. So, but on something like Little Birds, for instance, since we've used that as a reference point, what sort of makes up your team? So who's involved to helping you realize what we end up seeing?
I would say from at a point of after we've shot and we're looking at finishing.
Well, yeah, and also from a point of how many sort of crew and things have you got on set sort of helping you set up shots and color fixtures right. And get it all.
Yeah. Well, it's a Little Birds, for example. There's no average shoot, but I sort of start from the expectation of the schedule. So if the expectation on a TV show is that you shoot 25 setups a day with 2 cameras and you're doing like 6 to 8 pages and maybe 7 strips, maybe with a location move, then I start with that and go, okay, then I need this, for me to light in this way. If that's going to be the tone of this, if we're not saying it's we're not doing like a story that's just revealed in natural light and we're bringing in some negative fill. If we're actually having to bring in heavy units that are labor intensive, you can't do that with 2 people on your like sort of G&E package. You need a team of electricians, and you need a team of grips, and you need to be able to sort of leapfrog ahead so that when we arrive, even if it's 2 exteriors, I might be set up here, but sometimes, if the budget allows, I might have a more mobile generator over there and have that already set up with like 30 kilowatts of lighting, so that when we turn up, that package is already there. We don't have to strike that package and move it, because it's always takes longer to sort of to pull down the heavy equipment and move it on. So I really, I like to work with enough people that I can leapfrog and pre-light as I go. So it's generally a team of, on the lighting side of things, if I had 5 and a rigger, that would be great. And that would be a job that involves maybe, let's say, bigger houses, stately homes, where you might need to put maybe 4 lights across each window outside. That might need to be pre-lit, and then there's gear to be brought inside. If you were doing a more run and gun approach, then I'd be down to maybe 3. It's always hard to work with 2 on the electrical side. I'd be nervous about having less than 3, because I think you can work 2 people on a set and then still have 1 person even driving ahead in a small van, going ahead. As long as there's something happening ahead of me, then that's, and I always feel that's with the lighting, because I like to, once we finish the scene, if we're moving on, I like to be like straight away onto that next, wherever it is, next set, next location. But when I get there, I like to see what's already there. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I can see a 24K there, and I can see a 360. Okay, and I know the camera's going to be here in 20 minutes, and I know the lighting is not going to be here for another hour. But I've already got those 2 lights up, and now I might have been hoping for more than that in the plan, but if that's what there is, that's what I'll work with. And in the same way, if it's not there for any reason, which can always happen, then you work with, for whatever reason, you go, okay, well, it's not going to turn up. I would very rarely say to a director, I'm sorry, we can't shoot because, I don't have, the lights here. I'm not going to wait. Very rarely, I mean, it would very rarely happen anyway, but it'd be a tough call to say, oh, actually, I need to sort of hold things up because I can't quite get the aesthetic that I'm after.
And in terms of you're controlling stuff, are you often running through lighting boards and things? I mean, obviously the big tungstens and the HMIs and things, there's not a lot of control needed there. But certainly with LED, and of course, with things shifting, the color capabilities of fixtures expanding these days, are you finding that that's having a knock-on effect on your team? Because it's almost opening up a new specialist role, really, isn't it? Someone who can sort of plug it all together and talk to it from a control point of view.
Yeah, kind of chief CLT, chief lighting technician. I mean, I always look with stage work, which has now creeped into bigger set work. I always look for everything to be back to the desk, because it's a mixture of so many tubes, so many, when I say so many, I don't mean just like 50 units or what have you. It might even be 3 units or 2 units. But as soon as I'm mixing something like tubes, LED fixtures, tungsten, not the the HMI not to this, but I would put all the tungsten back to a desk, even the bigger stuff, with bigger dimmer packs, and all the smaller stuff's all back. And then if that's on a stage, then that program will stay set. So generally with the lighting on a stage, I will really try to keep everything there. There's often a pressure. You can leave the distro in, but you'll have to take some of the units out with you. But I really, if you're going between set location back to set, but I really try and leave the studio stuff if we can afford it. So obviously it's a big budget thing, but if we can afford it, I'd really like everything just to stay there so that we can go back, and then it's just a case of getting the desk back in and the program is still saved, and it takes less setting up time then.
Because I know that things tend to shoot out of sequence, based on what sets they're on and all that kind of thing. How tricky is it to sort of keep track of your sort of lighting narrative as it moves through? Because on each set on a day, you might do several different shots that you might have to come back to at another point, that you're sort of, you have to sort of always sort of tie that together. How do you sort of manage that?
Yeah, these days I have like an iPad with me in a crash-proof case because I kept breaking them. But I have an iPad. I just have a running table, in Pages, and each scene very quickly. Even it takes like a minute, but I can, say, oh, here we are, and I went for, if it's a color, I would say like cyan 15 rather than cyan 30. It's like 4 Helios. I put something like cyan 15. 4 Helios, 24K. I won't draw on it. I would literally just put the fixtures, and then I'll put the camera information, the color temperature of the camera, because I mess around with that quite a lot. I'll put the color temperature of the camera, the color temperature of all the tubes if we're using, because quite often, my camera might be set at like 4.8, and then my film might be cooler. My film might be like, I don't know, like, well, 5.6, but it might be more than that. I mess around with things quite a lot, so I tend to. The important thing for me is remembering how much I've messed around with things. So I just put really the color temperature of the camera, the color temperature of the fittings, because they'll all be all over the place, and the gels, and which, and if I've used a particular key light, even if I use a lot of mirrors and things. So if I've used a particular mirror, that might be a theme that goes with that character. So, and I just literally, shoot day, scene like 142, that's it. That'll be what I use next scene. Just a little strip. And I find that vital. You never think it's going to be in the first week or 2 weeks of a shoot. It's a bit, you think, oh, really? And you're doing this and there's no time. But by the time you get to week 4 and you can't remember, you still got your plan, but you literally, you're back on that set and you can just go boom. And I always take I have the DIT each day. We always have like a chronological frame grab from each scene. So I can really quickly relate it with my own, on my own files. I can go, right, that was 4 weeks ago, scene 42. It was these units, that color temperature. And I can quickly just see a close up and just see what I was doing. And a wide. I'll have a close up and a wide from each scene.
So I've got another short video to play, but this is introducing our Phosphor Fresnel. So it's part of the same Phosphor family designed for film and TV, uses the same X8 and a daylight HDR color mix, but it's in a Fresnel format.
Fresnels have been around since the beginning of lighting design. These incandescent workhorse fixtures are known for their smooth wash, adjustable zoom capabilities, and incredible brightness. With the addition of LEDs, Fresnels became more about the technology and less about beautiful light. But with this product, we wanted a true Fresnel. Phosphor Fresnel takes the most desired features of a standard incandescent Fresnel and adds in the nuanced color mixing, smooth fades, and LED technology of ETC's other professional-grade fixtures. Let's start with the zoom. You'll see that there is control of the Fresnel Zoom from both the front and back of the fixture. Use the accessory slot for whatever beam control accessories you may need, such as barn doors and softboxes. The 8-leaf barn door gives you control over the shape of your beam, providing clean, soft edges without color fringing. The homogenized optic gives you an impressively seamless beam of light. The adjustable yoke lets you easily balance the fixture after focus. Just like the panel, Phosphor Fresnel offers wireless communication using City Theatrical's multiverse technology. Use your console to control as many as 10 universes of DMX from a single multiverse transmitter. In addition, use your smartphone or other mobile device with ETC's SetLight app to communicate with your fixture via NFC. Push and pull information, including fixture setup data, even without the fixture being powered. The UI also includes a convenient lock switch to protect the settings from accidental bumping. All Phosphor fixtures are available in 2 arrays, Luster X8 for the full gamut of color mixing, and the Daylight HDR for the brightest whites. You choose the light you need for the application. As a designer, brightness is not always the most important factor. That's why, with Phosphor, we give you a choice. Select brightest for the highest output, or best spectral for the highest quality. Available with up to 9,700 lumens, you'll never compromise on brightness again. The introduction of the panel light in early 2020 brought with it the introduction of the deep red LEDs to ETC's fixture arrays. This deep red LED brings subtle but very important dimension to your light, a dimension you may not have even known you were missing. Previously, the industry standard for red looked like this. But now, we have deep red, and what was red looks orange. Now watch what happens when we add deep red to blues and greens. The change is subtle, but it's this nuanced color that makes your lighting stand above the rest. But you need more than saturated colors, and ETC's Phosphor fixtures also give you better whites. Warm whites, cool whites, and everything in between come alive with the addition of these deep red tones. Phosphor Fresnel is currently available with a 7-inch aperture, and the Fresnel family will round out with 10 and 5-inch variants as well. Like all ETC products, the Phosphor Fresnel is backed by ETC's 24/7, 365 support and unmatched warranty. Bright, quality color with the Fresnel beam you need. These fixtures come with impressive color mixing capability and the smooth, controllable beam you expect from a standard Fresnel. Learn more and request a demo at studio.etcconnect.com.
Great. So yeah, that's our new Fresnel. So
I do like that deep red.
it's amazing. I tell you, it's what it's done
I do like
is
that.
incredible.
That's
You know, it's
That's pretty sexy.
when we were first demoing the fixtures in London, that we had the sort of standard, what I call the standard red emitter, and you go, yeah, that's red. I'm quite happily, I'll accept that's red. And then all of a sudden, you put that deep red against it, and really the red looks orange. It's amazing that difference, and what it does tonally is really, really exciting, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited to see
Yeah,
it.
no, I think it's going to be a game changer. So we've had a question come in from Dennis. We sort of touched on it a bit, but I don't know if there's anything else maybe you want to add. The question is, has LED technology simplified or complicated the process?
simplified in a nutshell, hugely. I think the only complications I ever find are just quickly resolved. They're really about the color mix and how it fits in with the other fixtures I'm using. If I'm using gels, for example, if I'm using color on a tungsten or an HMI light with a gel that I've used for ages, how do I get the same feeling with an LED mix? But this simplification is just huge. From, in drama, like something like a small scene outside at night, to be able to have fixtures that you can take on batteries, so you can, whatever scene lighting that you've got, you can have small fixtures. You can even use those, those little things, what are the AX7s, AX5s, pop those behind, like park hands, pop those as rockets behind trees. And, you've got a multitude of, there's so many units you can use as like a little key light when you're working now. And I think from a creative point of view, your sort of lighting style is never defined by the units. It's like defined by your sense of your own aesthetic and your creative expression. And now there's so many units that you can use in LED that you can really find the right one that's going to work, that's going to work for your project. It's and the way you want to tell the story with the light. It's massively simplified the logistics and the cost. Simplified things, so many things, like food commercials where you'd want to set to stay a low temperature and not be too hot, but you need so many intricate little reflections and what have you. Those sets, I do a lot of food photography, and they used to be so hot, those sets. So just LED has massively changed the way we work around sort of commercial genre stuff. Just simplified it in every single way. I can't see in any way how it would be sort of labelled complicating it. Although there's more units to choose from, but I think what I mean about saying you don't need to be freaked out by that, because it's not going to change your aesthetic and your expression. I think you can easily find and rely on the things that fixtures are a lot more reliable now. The technology is more stable, ever more stable than it was. And then we've seen with the phosphors, the innovations. Now there's innovations in hue that I wasn't aware of. That deep reds I find really interesting, and it's something that with red especially, you're always looking at that. It's such a difficult wavelength to work with as a strong hue. On film it always was, and on digital it is as well. You're looking for something interesting there. So it's generally made everything so much more simple.
And how do you find the sort of combination with LED versus normal sort of gelled fixtures, and then working in digital camera space? Because obviously how they see light and deal with color is kind of different again, really, isn't it? Because each sensor is slightly different. Each one works in a slightly different color space.
I think that's
why
why
it hard to get that balance, or is it getting easier?
No, it's getting easier. I think you get to know your cameras. I think that's maybe one that, at the moment I'm using the Sony Venice. Who's to say what I'll be using, or what would be a go-to camera in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. I think you get to know how a camera responds, irrespective of what LUT you put on it. It's really when you get back into the grade and you see what that raw image has held, how that color space, how the codecs work. It's not really about the LUT and how you're shooting on set. It's really about now, the jobs I'm doing are finished in HDR in nits, and it's a slight adjustment for me in a lighting approach, in protecting the highlights a little bit more, squeezing everything into the middle. But the technology is now making that more simple. You can trust in it. Whereas saying 10 years ago, you felt you were beta testing it, and you felt like, you know, you're going to come a cropper, and then it was going to be on you. So I think, you know, the technology is really helping, you know, helping schedules, helping budgets, helping creativity.
We've had a question come in from Fernando, which I can probably start with an answer, but I'd be keen on your, if you've come across this at all. And it says, I know it's not a studio light, but I use the Source 4 luster, which is one of our LED fixtures, and he gets banding lines in his videos. And have you come across the same issue using LEDs, and how do you solve it? That is the sort of refresh rate, and there's a setting on the fixture, Fernando, that you can go into, and if you set that rate higher, it does get rid of that flicker. It's about getting out of what we call that sort of flicker zone. You get that sort of shimmer that happens, and it is a setting on the fixture. You can go into it through the menu, and you can set the rate there. Typically, anything above sort of 25,000 gets into the flicker free range. So if you are having those problems, Fernando, please feel free to drop me an email, and we can help you a little bit more with that. I don't know if that's something that you've, you know, if you have issues with that sort of. I know when it first came out, I suppose, you know,
Yeah.
flicker on camera was an issue. I mean, even HMI, I think there used to be an issue with it not being flicker free.
Yeah, I think because of the curve, the sine curve of HMI is always a I went through a phase. It was quite a short phase. I was doing these hair commercials, and I wanted to do it with HMI light because of the way that the saying I love tungsten light, but we wanted to sort of explore how HMI light reflected, you know, it reflects off the skin in a certain way. So we're doing these, and they're always high on film as well. So 35mm, high speed. Typically, you know, a hair flick was 150 frames a second on a 435, and I remember doing one. It was in India, actually, in Mumbai, and there was I had a bunch of different HMI units. So obviously the curves are just different, and so the flicker was horrendous. And I remember, I mean, the flicker was so bad. I remember saying to the producer, like, just fronting it and going, "Yeah, it'll be okay. We'll just press the deflicker button once we get into post." I was thinking, God Christ, I hope there is a deflicker button, because I think I might have overdone it here. Because, and actually, it was really straightforward to sort out, and we got rid of. But I remember at the time it was difficult because we were dealing with the different sine curves from the different, because we had different fixtures from different companies and what have you. But I generally, it's interesting you say about there's the adjustment on the unit. That's really interesting. It's something I wasn't aware of, actually, because I would default go, if it's not just like flicker free or 50 hertz or whatever it's going to be. And I didn't know it was incremental, because I would always jog. You can jog the shutter incrementally on the cameras in a very fine way. So, you know, you would do that, but it's also sort of isolating which unit is the flicker. We're saying that phosphorus flickering. It's interesting, and it's encouraging to know that there's latitude to dial it in a little bit. But essentially, you can sort of deflicker. Not me personally, but I found it quite straightforward to get rid of flicker in post.
Okay. And how varied do you find your sort of work? Do you find you're sort of doing commercial one day and something like a Little Birds the next, and then you're on to something completely different again, or are you finding that you've sort of found a sort of place where you're sort of comfortable at the moment?
Well, I like to keep my sort of commercial profile relevant, and I feel that in commercial work, you can become sort of yesterday's fish and chip paper quite quickly. So I try and keep a balance. Like, I love doing long form drama. That's a huge passion, and I love the craft that's involved in genre commercials. My commercials would be typically like fashion work and food work, and maybe some sort of premium brand ads. But I like, in the old car stuff, but I like how the approach with light is different to each commercial genre. and you have to kind of tick the boxes. You can't really deviate too far away from what the expectation of the clients are, but you want to bring something new. And I really like that in commercials. I love that challenge. And you know, and I love sort of going, oh yeah, cool, we can do this. It looks beautiful, and you know, we can work this way. So I at the moment I'm finding I tend to be I'm in a long form world. In the project I'm on at the moment, it's like a 6-month project. I would like to think that at the end of that project, I'll try and, you know, I'll be approaching the directors I work with in commercials while I'm on this, saying, you know, bear me in mind for something in the autumn. So, you know, it's nice to invest creatively in a project, a longer project, and then get some breathing space. I think creatively, like any sort of process, you can't just go from job to job to job. You know, you can't, it's difficult. So you need to sort of, on a longer form project, you need to sort of wash it out to let the new ideas come in. And I feel that working in commercials in between is a nice way of doing that. It enables enables your sort of fire to die down, and then to approach some new scripts that might be coming in. So I try and combine them both and not oversaturate one or the other.
And are there other sort of cinematographers and things whose work you sort of really admire? Is there anything that sort of stands out for you?
Oh yeah, every day. I mean, you watch, especially at the moment. You know, there's so much content these days. You know, you're looking at stuff. I find it hard remembering names and stuff, so I have to keep sort of looking back. But you know, this on the colourful front, who's God, I'm going to look it up. Guy did like a Atomic Blonde. What's his name? Atomic Blonde. Let's see. I was just brain freeze. Oh yeah, Jonathan Saylor, who did. I love that Atomic Blonde. Again, it's very colourful. So his work, Philip the Sword, he did Grandmaster. Works with Bruno Avelian a lot. So I tend to find myself responding in a modern way to cinematographers who work both commercially and with long form. And yeah, it's just all the you always go back to sort of classic cinematography, whether it's like Sven Nykvist or anybody really. There's just such a huge gamut of history, and now there's so many sort of contemporaries that I'm not saying the list is endless, but you're constantly inspired, basically. You know,
and is there sort of a sort of default go-to source of inspiration for yourself? So, you know, is it fine art? Is it more sort of photography? Is there anything that, if you know you're sort of looking for ideas, is there a sort of default starting place that you go looking?
Yeah, I tend to go to art of the period that it is about, and photography, art and photography really for me before a film, because I think with a moving image, you're never really, it's a trap to try and ape something. You're not really, you know, you're not going to go. Everyone says they come with it. Oh yeah, we want it to be, you know, we've seen this. It's going to be the next Handmaid's Tale, or you know. Colin Watkinson, he's amazing. It's another, you know, totally admire Colin's work. The Fall, the film he did with Tarsem, was absolutely incredible. And again, that's someone who works like across commercial genre and into character-driven drama. Yeah, so I look at sort of the theme of the theme of the light. And so at the moment I'm working on a 16th century job, so I'm obviously looking at sort of Renaissance art, European art, but looking at sort of Chiaroscuro in different ways, you know, from the kind of the theatrical Caravaggio, which is too much for us, to sort of Georges de la Tour, which is like more sort of everyday, you know, didn't really paint sort of the biblical, paints more sort of everyday people, but the feeling of the light on those. And then sort of, you know, looking at sort of dark, you know, painters who would sort of paint a more sort of emotional landscape. And then contemporary photography, you know, from a commercial way, you know, always people like sort of Tony Ray Jones, Saul Leiter, are sort of inspiring. And I tend to sort of look at catalogues of photographic work. So like Phillips, the auctioneers, they they always have like catalogs 4 times a year, and they have a huge gamut of commercial photographers and fine art photographers whose works are selling. And I just find just glancing across a broad spectrum of kind of approach and genre really, interesting, and something will jump out and go, okay, that's kind of what we're thinking of in regarding this particular story. But it's less than approaching, saying, oh, there's this film, there's this late, I think it sort of comes from other areas.
Great. Well, that's kind of sort of brings us up to the end of our time slot. So Ed, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us. It's been really great chatting to you.
Absolute pleasure.
No,
Thanks
you're
for
most
having
welcome.
me.
And
Really enjoyed.
again, well done on your work on Little Birds. I mentioned it before, but I thought it was really, really great. So congratulations on that, and thank you very much for joining us. To everyone else, thank you for attending our session as always. It's always really great to have you with us. Light Bytes does happen on the first Friday of every month, so our next Light Bytes is Friday the 5th of March. We will be sending out notifications soon about topics and things like that. So pencil in the date. Friday 5th of March is our next one. That's all from us really. Ed, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone else for joining. As always, feel free to get in touch. It's always good to hear from anyone. If you want to see any product demos, anything like that, there's a link in the chat. You can get a hold of us, and we can set that up for you. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Cool.
And Ed, hopefully we'll speak again soon. Great.
Thanks so much.
Brilliant.
Thanks for having me.
Take
Cheers,
care.
Declan.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone. Bye now. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been really great having you here, and hopefully we'll see you again on the 5th of March. April is a slightly weird month because Easter falls on the first, it's Easter weekend on the first Friday of April, so we're actually moving it to the second Friday in April, but after that it'll be back on the first Friday again of every month. So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you all again, and stay in touch and have a good weekend. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.